You're watching a 14-year-old girl being dragged out of the emperor's room. She's not walking. Two servants are pulling her by the arms. Her feet drag across the marble floor. Her eyes are open, but there's no one inside anymore. 3 days ago, that girl was laughing in the room next to yours. This morning they called her. Now she's something else, like someone pulled her soul out. A servant sees you watching. She grabs your arm, pulls you back into your room. Don't look, never look. And when they come for you, don't fight. Rome. Year 39, AD. You're 14 years old. You've been locked in a place called the Garden of Venus for 6 days. And you just learned what happens to girls when they get summoned. Your dad said this was a privilege. Your mum cried when you got on the carriage. The neighbours watched with envy as you rode up the hill toward the palace. No one told you the truth. No one told you that the most powerful man in the world has a system, like a factory, that writes down girls' names on tablets, their ages, what they look like, and calls them one by one to his room. And when they come out, they're not the same anymore. This is the story of what Caligula did to the girls in his palace. And the scariest part isn't what he did. It's that no one stopped him. Not the senators, not the guards, not even the parents who handed their daughters over at the door. Everyone knew, and everyone stayed quiet. If this story grips you, drop a like and subscribe. It takes a second and helps us pull more voices out of the silence. But before you understand what happened in those rooms, you need to understand how a human being becomes capable of this. Because Caligula wasn't born a monster, he was manufactured. The year is 19 AD. A 7-year-old boy runs through a Roman military camp, wearing a miniature soldier's uniform, complete with tiny armour and little red boots. The soldiers adore him. They call him Caligula, Little Boots. He's the son of Germanicus, Rome's greatest general since Julius Caesar. The men believe this child brings them victory. He has no idea what's coming. 1 year later, his father dies. The official story: sudden illness. The whispered story: poison. Ordered by Emperor Tiberius himself. Caligula is 8 years old when the machine starts destroying his family. His mother, dragged from their home, accused of treason, starved to death in exile. His oldest brother, arrested, imprisoned, so hungry he tried to eat the stuffing from his mattress. His second brother, exiled to an island where guards tortured him until he smashed his own head against the walls to end it. One by one, erased, and young Caligula watches all of it happen. By 31 AD, he's the last one left, 19 years old, the sole survivor. Then comes the summons. Emperor Tiberius wants to see him. On Capri, the ancient historians, Suetonius, Tacitus, people writing within living memory of these events, describe Capri as a house of horrors. Tiberius had turned the island into his personal fortress, far from Rome, far from anyone who might object to what he did there. Into this environment walks teenage Caligula. He knows Tiberius murdered his family, everyone knows, but he can't show it. One wrong look, one flash of anger, and he's dead. Suetonius writes something chilling. There never was a better servant or a worse master. For 6 years, Caligula watches, studies, learns exactly how to break human beings from the greatest monster in Roman history. Then in 37 AD, Tiberius dies. Some say natural causes, others say Caligula smothered him with a pillow. Either way, the hostage is now emperor. Rome celebrates. They think they're getting the son of beloved Germanicus. They have no idea what they just unleashed. For 7 months, everything seems perfect. Caligula releases prisoners, hosts spectacular games, distributes money to the people. Then he gets sick, a severe fever that lasts weeks. The person who wakes up is not the same person who went to sleep. What happened during those fevered days we'll never know. But when Caligula recovered, something inside him had shattered, and Rome was about to learn what he'd been hiding. Imperial officials begin traveling through Rome and the surrounding territories. They visit houses of wealthy families and poor families alike. They're not looking for soldiers. They're not recruiting talent. They're looking for three things: age, beauty, purity. Girls between 12 and 16 years old, faces that please the emperor, and virgins verified by family reputation and sometimes examined. Suetonius, writing decades later, describes this process in fragments. He mentions young women of noble families brought to the palace. He notes that Caligula inspected them personally, as a slave dealer examines merchandise before purchase. Even Suetonius, a man who documented orgies, murders, and incest without flinching, seems uncomfortable describing what came next. Records were kept. Wax tablets documented each girl's name, age, physical appearance, family connections. This wasn't impulsive cruelty. This was inventory management. Human beings reduced to entries in an accounting ledger. The system was terrifyingly efficient. Officials travelled in pairs carrying imperial seals that opened any door. They had quotas to meet, reports to file. They measured their success in numbers: how many candidates identified, how many families visited, how many girls delivered. This wasn't chaos, this was bureaucracy, and that's what makes it truly horrifying. Not one madman acting on impulse, but dozens of functionaries processing human beings with the same detachment they'd used to count grain shipments. The families didn't resist. In a society where honour was everything, being selected by the emperor was presented as the highest privilege. Parents competed for the opportunity, dressed their daughters in white, braided their hair with flowers. Some mothers wept. Mothers, when the carriage departed. But they wept quietly, because crying loudly would mean they weren't happy, and not being happy would mean serving the emperor was something bad. So they swallowed their tears, swallowed their doubts, and let their daughters go. They called it the Garden of Venus. The name sounds beautiful, romantic, like a place filled with flowers and fountains where young women learned poetry and music. It was a prison. But here's what made it worse than any dungeon. A dungeon looks like a dungeon. Chains, cold stone. You know where you stand. This place looked like paradise. Silk curtains everywhere. Beds softer than anything these girls had ever touched. Perfume thick enough to taste. Food most Romans never knew existed. Servants who smiled and fulfilled every request. Everything beautiful, everything wrong. Modern psychologists have a term for what this does to the human mind. Cognitive dissonance. When your senses tell you one thing and your instincts tell you another, your brain starts to crack. You can't trust your own perceptions anymore. The girls couldn't leave their rooms without permission, couldn't contact their families, didn't know what day it was, didn't know what they were supposed to do. They just waited, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. No one explained anything. No one told them when they'd be called. No one told them what happened when they were. They only heard footsteps at night, passing their doors, stopping at another door, a girl being taken, and the next morning, that girl would be different, quieter, emptier, or she wouldn't come back at all. The servants who brought food watched everything. Every tear got reported. Every whisper between girls got documented. If two girls started forming a friendship, finding comfort in shared suffering, they'd be separated, moved to different wings. Because connection breeds strength, and strength breeds resistance. Isolation was part of the design. The waiting itself was the torture. In the 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman conducted experiments that revealed something disturbing about the mind. When subjects learned that nothing they did could change their situation, they stopped trying. They gave up, not from weakness, but because their brains were trying to protect them from madness. He called it learned helplessness. First you fight, then you realize fighting doesn't work. Then you stop fighting, then you stop feeling. The girls in the Garden of Venus were being systematically broken, not through violence, not yet, but through luxury that felt wrong, kindness that hid cruelty, and uncertainty that never ended. By the time Caligula called for them, most had already surrendered. That was the point. We're about to reveal how Caligula used these girls to control all of Rome. If you've made it this far, you understand why this story matters. Subscribe, because Crown and Dagger doesn't hide from history's darkest chapters. But Caligula wasn't satisfied with just the girls. He wanted to break everyone. The historian Cassius Dio describes imperial banquets that became theatres of systematic humiliation. Marble halls filled with Rome's most powerful men, senators, generals, governors, eating and drinking and pretending everything was normal. Then Caligula would stand, walk between the tables, examine the wives of his guests, the way he examined the girls in his garden. He would select one, take her hand, lead her away, and her husband would sit there, do nothing, say nothing. What could he do? Object. His children would be dead by morning, his entire family erased from Roman history. So he sat, drank his wine, made small talk with the man beside him, who was pretending not to hear anything. Waited. 20 minutes passed. 30. The conversation around him was forced, brittle, everyone pretending this was normal, everyone pretending they couldn't hear the sounds from the other room. Cassius Dio recorded one specific incident. A senator named Valerius Asiaticus watched as Caligula took his wife. When she was returned, Caligula sat down and began describing, in graphic detail, exactly what had happened. He rated her performance, compared her to other senators' wives, made jokes. Asiaticus had to smile, had to nod, had to thank him. Some humiliations you don't forget. 3 years later, Asiaticus was one of the conspirators who helped plan Caligula's assassination. But here's what made the banquets truly evil. It wasn't just about the women. It was about complicity. Once you sat at that table and did nothing while the emperor violated someone's wife, you were guilty too. You couldn't expose him without exposing yourself. You couldn't rebel because you were already part of the machine. Suetonius writes that Caligula would sometimes loan the palace girls to favoured senators, not as gifts, as traps. Accept the loan and you've participated, refuse and you've insulted the emperor. Either choice destroys you. That's how tyranny actually works. Not through armies and laws alone. Through shame. Through complicity. Through making everyone so dirty that no one can point fingers. The senators who attended those banquets went home to their families, kissed their children goodnight, pretended they were still honourable men. But they knew, and Caligula knew they knew, and that knowledge was its own kind of chain. Every machine has a flaw. While Caligula was busy breaking senators and destroying young girls, he made a critical mistake. He forgot about the guards, the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguards, elite soldiers who stood inches from him every single day, armed, trained, lethal. One of them was named Cassius Chaerea, senior officer, respected veteran, a man who had served Rome with honour for decades. Chaerea had one physical characteristic that Caligula found endlessly amusing. A high-pitched voice. Every day, new jokes, new mockery, in front of everyone. When Chaerea had to ask for the daily military password, a standard protocol, Caligula would assign him words like Venus or kiss me, feminine words, humiliating words. The other soldiers would smirk. Day after day, month after month, Suetonius notes that Caligula thought this was hilarious, thought Chaerea would swallow it like everyone else. He miscalculated. Senators had families to protect. They could rationalize staying quiet. But Chaerea was a soldier, a man trained to solve problems with a blade, a man who stood next to the emperor every day with a sword on his hip. And Caligula had just taught him that life under this emperor wasn't worth living. January 24th, 41 AD. Caligula walks through an underground corridor beneath the theatre. Narrow, dimly lit, stone walls on both sides. He's in a good mood, looking forward to a performance. Chaerea is waiting in the shadows. The details come from multiple sources. When Caligula approached, Chaerea stepped forward. Standard protocol. Guards always checked in with the emperor. He asked for the daily password. Caligula smirked, opened his mouth to deliver another humiliation. One last joke at Chaerea's expense. He never finished the sentence. Chaerea screamed, "Take this," and drove his sword up under Caligula's ribs. The corridor was too narrow to escape. Conspirators at both ends. They swarmed him. 30 stab wounds. They didn't stop until nothing remained that could possibly be alive. 4 years of accumulated terror. 4 years of humiliation. 4 years of watching girls destroyed and senators broken. Released in 60 seconds of frenzied violence. But they weren't finished. They found Caligula's wife, killed her. Then they found the nursery, his daughter, 2 years old. A soldier grabbed the child and slammed her head against a marble wall. No heirs, no revenge. The bloodline ends here. The machine had consumed its creator. The new emperor, Claudius, faced an impossible problem. What do you do with the girls still locked in the Garden of Venus? If he acknowledges what happened, the entire empire learns Rome's shame. Families demand justice. Senators who participated get exposed. The system unravels. So he chose silence. The girls were sent home, quietly, with gifts, gold, silk, jewels, not compensation. Bribes, payment for amnesia. Most families took the deal. What choice did they have? Their daughter was damaged. Goods. No one would marry her now. The best they could hope for was silence. Pretend it never happened. But the girls didn't forget. How do you forget something like that? How do you go back to normal life after what they experienced? According to fragments preserved by later writers, some never let anyone touch them again. Flinched at footsteps. Couldn't sleep without a lamp burning. Some woke screaming from nightmares for decades. Their families learning to pretend they didn't hear. Some simply stopped speaking entirely. Sat by windows for hours. Stared at walls. Lost in memories they couldn't escape and couldn't share. The Greek physician, Galen, writing a century later, described symptoms he'd observed in women who'd survived traumatic captivity, loss of speech, inability to eat, a deadness behind the eyes. He didn't connect it to the Garden of Venus. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he knew and couldn't say. But the symptoms match perfectly. One woman, according to a fragment found centuries later, didn't speak about the palace for 50 years. 50 years of silence. Then on her deathbed, she told her granddaughter everything. The granddaughter wrote it down, then burned most of it, but pieces survived. Copied by monks who didn't understand what they were preserving. Hidden in monastery libraries for centuries. And those fragments are how we know any of this happened. Claudius ordered most of Caligula's records destroyed. The ledgers, the tablets, the documentation of the machine, burned. The official histories we have today were written decades later. Suetonius, Tacitus, Cassius Dio, working from memories, rumours, and surviving fragments. Which means what you just heard is only what survived the purge. Imagine what was lost. Imagine what was so disturbing that even Romans who watched people die in arenas decided it needed to be erased. The Garden of Venus is gone now, buried under centuries of construction. Archaeologists have found fragments, a mosaic here, a perfume bottle there. But the rooms themselves? Destroyed. Forgotten. Rome wanted to forget. But you can't erase everything. You can burn documents, silence witnesses, rewrite histories, but you can't erase what people carry inside them. You can't kill what gets carved into memory. You can't destroy the fragments that survivors hide in places no one thinks to look. The girl from the beginning of this story, the one being dragged out of the emperor's room, she was real. We don't know her name. History didn't bother recording it. She was just a number on a wax tablet, a piece of inventory that got used and discarded. But she existed. She had dreams. She had a family. She had a whole life ahead of her before they knocked on her door. And someone somewhere loved her. That's what empires do. They turn people into numbers. They turn lives into inventory. They build systems so efficient that no one person feels responsible. The officials were just following orders. The guards were just doing their jobs. The senators were just protecting their families. The parents were just accepting an honor. Everyone had an excuse, and the machine kept running. The only thing that stopped Caligula wasn't morality, wasn't justice, wasn't the Roman people rising up in outrage. It was one soldier who got humiliated one too many times.